Along with my fellow socialists, I am extremely proud of everything we're doing to try to make America the booming socialist heartland we all want it to be, just like Venezuela, by giving power to the people through the full equal distribution of wealth and state ownership of means of production. I love Karl Marx. Now, if you're a left-wing activist, this is probably what right-wingers assume you must believe. I mean, recent events have led conservative commentator and millennial Trump supporter Charlie Kirk to call the Democratic Party the party of Karl Marx. And I'm sure a lot of you have seen the video from right-wing conspiracy site InfoWars, where the reporter basically says that somebody wants America to be eating rats like Venezuela just because they support Bernie Sanders.
Hi, are you okay, Bernie Sanders?
Yeah, I am.
What do you like about him?
That he's a socialist.
Why is socialism good? You know Venezuela, right?
Heard of it.
A majority of the country is currently eating rats, while their politicians are drinking champagne on a daily basis.
I'm talking about America.
Well, I'm saying, since if Bernie Sanders were president, right, and he wanted to bring the same ideas as for socialism into this country, do you think that we would benefit?
Yeah.
But I just told you Venezuela's eating rats.
That's right, just talk about the most extreme foreign example of socialism when talking about its implementation in America to basically try and prove that it doesn't work. The conversation about whether democratic socialism can make America great has been started again after Alexandria Ocasio Cortez, the hard-left upcoming Democrat politician, beat 10-term incumbent Joe Crowley in a New York primary in June, after proclaiming to be a democratic socialist. But does that title mean that her ideas are anything like what people usually think of when they think of socialism? Well, not really, because when looking at her policy proposals, she's running on a far-left platform of Medicare for all, abolishing ICE, strict gun control, housing as a human right, banning private prisons, and raising the minimum wage. So immediately, they look far more like social democratic policies than socialist policies. I mean, a lot of other Western developed countries do have these policies in place. An example of that is Norway. Norway runs, like many other Scandinavian countries, on the Nordic model, with high taxes and substantial social safety nets provided by the government. And it's doing pretty well. The average student scored 504 in reading literacy, maths and science in the OECD's Programme for International Student Assessment, slightly higher than the OECD average of 486. In terms of employment, about 74% of people aged 15 to 64 in Norway have a paid job, above the OECD employment average of 67%. In terms of satisfaction with life, Norwegians gave it a 7.6 grade on average, much higher than the OECD average of 6.5. In Norway, the average household net adjusted disposable income per capita is $35,739 a year. That's higher than the OECD average of $30,563 a year. There may be a gap between the rich and the poor, with the top 20% earning 4 times as much as the bottom 20%, but compare that to America, with the top 20% earning 8 times more than the bottom 20%. Opinions on whether Cortez will be successful do differ even amongst the left. I have here, for example, an opinion piece from RT.com, which says the Democratic left, not the liberal establishment, can defeat Trump. And it talks about all the terrible, shocking things that President Trump did on his European tour, which, of course, I talked about in another video. And it talks particularly about the differences between the ways that Trump and Theresa May addressed the issue of immigration in Europe when they stood at the podium in Chequers. It says, "Let us begin by comparing what Trump uttered with what his partner said. When Trump and May were asked by a journalist what they think about the flow of immigrants into Europe, Trump brutally and honestly rendered his populist anti-immigrant position. Immigrants are a threat to European way of life. They are destabilizing the safety of our countries and bringing violence and intolerance. So we should keep them out." A careful listener could easily notice that Theresa May said the exact same thing, just in a more diplomatic and civilized way. Immigrants bring diversity. They contribute to our welfare. But we should carefully check whom we let in. Thus, we received a clear taste of the choice, which is more and more the only one presented to us: direct populist barbarism or a more civilized version of the same politics. Barbarism with a human face. It also argues how, in American politics right now, it takes two to tangle. It says the panicky reaction to Trump's latest acts demonstrates that he is undermining and destabilizing the US political establishment and its ideology. Let's not lose our nerve. Instead, we can exploit the confusion by systematically organizing another anti-establishment front from the left. And it concludes by saying that Cortez's win was hopefully the first in a series of shocks that will transform the Democratic Party. People like her, and not the well-known and tired faces from the liberal establishment, should be our answer to Trump. Fox has also dedicated an article to talking about the brilliance of Alexandria Ocasio Cortez's bold campaign design. It says that if you're in Eastern Bronx and Northern Queens, you might spot vibrant yellow campaign posters printed with a portrait of Ocasio-Cortez with her last name bookended by Spanish exclamation points. On the other hand, her opponent, Crowley, had plain, inoffensive posters. Surprise, they were red, white and blue, which signaled the Democratic Party's centrist, safe approach. After she began her campaign, she hired Tandem, a New York-based creative firm, to design her campaign's branding. And the Tandem designer Maria Arenas, who worked on the campaign, said that Alexandria is a candidate with revolutionary spirit. Voters heard it when she spoke. The branding is a reflection of her, which made it successful. And I don't know, but I could imagine some right-wingers saying that she rejects red, white and blue because she's anti-American, she hates the American flag. But in fact, she has had purple in her campaign a lot, which represents red and blue coming together and is the colour of the brand new Congress. It also points out that for outsider candidates, being unique pays off. And she has also rallied around a number of other people who could be described as democratic socialists. Abdel El-Sayed is currently running in 3rd Michigan's Democratic primary for governor. He's a 33-year-old former Detroit health commissioner, is young, progressive, Muslim, an undeniable underdog who has received Cortez's blessing. He says, "She's certainly validated the brand of politics that we're engaged in. Unapologetic, honest, focused on speaking truth to power, and inspiring and engaging voters who felt locked out of the system for a long time." Although, this US News article titled Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's Risky Roadshow does point out that socialism is a lightning rod term for many Americans that conjures up images of Karl Marx and is often convoluted with communism and the loss of individual liberty. Name one country that has ever worked with socialism, says Meghan McCain on a tirade against the ideology on The View this week. Every democratic socialist that is going on TV saying that it's good needs to start paying 90% in taxes. And I, of course, address these arguments saying that socialism is just basically like Karl Marx and can't be anything else at the beginning of my video. Another thing that is slightly risky about Cortez's campaign is that she has called for the abolition of ICE. Now, for those of you who don't know, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE for short, is the agency within the Department of Homeland Security responsible for identifying and removing undocumented aliens throughout the US. It was formed in 2003 as part of the bureaucratic reorganization in response to the 9/11 attacks. And I get the sense that for a lot of people, the reason why people want to abolish ICE is not necessarily because of the fact that it's deporting criminals. That's its job. It's more to do with the fact that, as The Nation reports, ICE is arresting immigrants in New York City's courts. It says, New York's immigrants don't take the justice system lightly. Whether they're the accuser or the accused, municipal courtrooms are daunting and confusing. But under Trump, they're especially dangerous. Since January, according to federal data, the New York City's area courts have seen a striking 900% spike in the number of immigrants targeted by ICE immigration agents, seeking to take them into federal, not local police custody, even though, of course, New York has sanctuary city laws, which does show that ICE, in these scenarios, is acting above the law. And this BBC article does also point out that there are disturbing videos of ICE doing some of their work. For example, there's this video of a mother who was separated from her teenage daughters because she was accused of being part of a drug smuggling operation, even though she was later released without charges.
Oh, it's fucking bullshit, man. What the fuck? Fuck no. No, what the fuck? Nah, hell no.
Pretty disturbing stuff. Now, looking through some of the statements that various different people have made, it's not exactly clear how many people want to do away with ICE entirely and not replace it, or how many people want to replace it with something new or just reform it to make it more humane. Elizabeth Warren said, "We need to rebuild our immigration system from top to bottom, starting with replacing ICE with something that reflects our morality." Also, Congressman Mark Pocan, who calls ICE Mr. Trump's personal police force, says, "This is a moment where this is what people want. When you ask them, do you want bold change or incremental change? Even Republicans want bold change across all spectrums. I think sometimes the political class likes to remain safe because it keeps them in office." Senator Ben Cardin of Maryland said, "We're going to have an agency. The question is, what policy does this agency carry out?" Although Sean McKelvey, a co-founder of the group Abolish ICE in The Nation magazine, said that the call to abolish ICE is above all the demand for the Democratic Party to begin seriously resisting an unbridled white supremacist surveillance state that it has a hand in creating. Others have been even more critical of the idea. Senator Richard Blumenthal of Connecticut was a bit more forceful, saying that abolishing ICE will accomplish nothing unless we change the Trump policies. And speaking of Trump, he has cashed in on the fear caused by the idea of not having ICE, because for many people, particularly in middle America, ICE is just part of the police. And there is polling showing that most Americans in general are not sold on the idea of abolishing ICE just yet, meaning that this call to abolish ICE could possibly be a risky platform for Alexandria Ocasio Cortez if her ideas want to have more wins in more places other than New York. If you're still feeling left in some amount of doubt about Alexandria Ocasio Cortez's plan for how exactly she will be able to fund her democratic socialism, or social democracy if you like, she did actually appear on The Daily Show with Trevor Noah on Comedy Central to explain more in detail exactly how she's going to fund it, by talking about, among other things, paying taxes.
If people pay their fair share, if corporations and the ultra-wealthy, for example, as Warren Buffett likes to say, if he paid as much as his secretary paid, 15%, if he paid a 15% tax rate, if corporations paid, if we reversed the tax bill but raised our corporate tax rate to 28%, which is not even as high as it was before,
Right.
If we do those two things and also close some of those loopholes, that's $2 trillion right there. That's $2 trillion in 10 years. And it's one of the wide estimates is that it's going to take $3 to $4 trillion to transition us to a 100% renewable energy economy. So we got $2 trillion from folks paying their fair share, which they were not paying before the Trump tax bill.
Right.
They weren't paying that before the Trump tax bill. If we get people to pay their fair share, that's $2 trillion in 10 years. Now, if we implement a carbon tax on top of that, so that we can transition and financially incentivize people away from fossil fuels. If we implement a carbon tax, that's an additional amount of a large amount of revenue that we can have. And then the last key, which is extremely, extremely important, is reprioritization. Just last year, we gave the military a $700 billion budget increase, which they didn't even ask for. They're like, we don't want another fighter jet. They're like, don't give us another nuclear bomb. You know?
Right.
They didn't even ask for it, and we gave it to them.
Okay, there is a lot of sound stuff there. For example, she mentions the corporate tax rate, and her plan for corporate tax rate doesn't really sound that radically socialist, given the fact that she doesn't even want to raise it as much as it was before the GOP tax bill in 2017. And she says that profitable companies were not paying their fair share of corporate tax before the Trump tax bill, and that is absolutely right. The New York Times says that they paid no taxes at some points. It says, although the top corporate tax rate is 35%, hardly any company actually pays that. The report by the Institute on Taxation and Economic Policy, a left-wing research group in Washington, found that 100 of them, nearly 40%, paid no taxes in at least 1 year between 2008 and 2015. 18, including General Electric, International Paper, Priceline.com and PG&E, incurred a total federal income tax bill of less than zero over the entire 8-year period, meaning that they received rebates. The Institute used the company's own regulatory filings to compute their tax rates. It seems that the theme with her policy on taxes seems to be about conserving, yes, conserving government spending. I can actually agree with budget Republicans on the fact that there are concerns with Trump's tax bill, given that according to the Congressional Budget Office, federal debt held by the public will rise to nearly 100% of GDP. The growth of GDP is predicted to be relatively strong this year and the next, and then it will be moderate the next few years. And then of course, when you do more research on the Trump tax bill, it's quite alarming to find out who it benefits the most. In 2018, it benefits the top 5% and then the top 1% the most, and then the long term, towards 2027, it's the top 0.1% of the population who benefit the most. So, she wants to introduce a buffet tax bill that will actually make the very richest people in the country pay their fair share. Her carbon tax is also a good idea. There have been many people who have said that a carbon tax is harmful to America's economy, but according to Global News, a carbon tax is an efficient way to reduce greenhouse gas emissions without slowing down an economy, a comprehensive study found. 11 teams participated in a detailed study called the Stanford Energy Modeling Forum project, which examined the economic and environmental impact of an economy-wide carbon tax in the United States. One of the most important findings was that all 4 models and all 4 tax rates show a decline in energy consumption, and the second important takeaway is that all 4 scenarios show that direct economic impact is minimal. Although, as well as that, in October, a non-partisan federal watchdog in the US released a report stating climate change is already costing US taxpayers billions of dollars each year, with those costs expected to rise as devastating storms, floods, wildfires, and droughts become more frequent in the coming decades. But here's the thing. Alexandria Ocasio Cortez proposed all of these things in response to a question about how she will be able to fund Medicare for all, which is one of the signature steps towards turning America into a social democracy. According to the Mercator Center, Medicare for all would place an unprecedented strain on the federal budget. It says that it would add approximately $32.6 trillion to federal budget commitments during the first 10 years of its implementation, 2022 to 2031. This projected increase in federal healthcare commitments would equal approximately 10.7% of GDP in 2022. This amount would rise to nearly 12.7% of GDP in 2031 and continue to rise thereafter. These statements are conservative because they assume that the legislation achieves its sponsors' goals of dramatically reducing payments to health providers in addition to substantially reducing drug prices and administrative costs. A doubling of all currently projected federal, individual, and corporate income tax collections would be insufficient to finance the added federal costs of the plan. So in short, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's propositions do not even get close to being able to fund Medicare for all. She has also made a number of false statements in the past as well, and PolitiFact has picked up on these, and one of them was one that she made in the interview with Trevor Noah. She said that just last year we gave the military a $700 billion budget increase, which they did not ask for. And this is false because that's the total defense budget for 2018, which marks an increase in $61 billion from 2017. Her campaign acknowledged this point. It is more than the Defense Department settled in negotiations for Trump's budget request, $668 billion, but exactly what they requested in their annual wish list to Congress. So they did actually ask for this amount of money. She has also got her facts incredibly wrong on unemployment. She made a statement that unemployment is low because everyone has 2 jobs. Unemployment is low because people are working 60, 70, 80 hours a week and can barely feed their family. She said this on Friday, July 13th, 2018 in an interview on PBS Firing Line. And it's false, in short, because even taking into account rhetorical excess, her statement is off in multiple ways. Fewer than 1 in 20 employed Americans hold a second job of any type, and the people who might be working as much as 70 or 80 hours a week represent a tiny fraction of that tiny fraction. The rates for either statistic are not high by historical standards. In any case, the Bureau of Labor Statistics does not use either of those factors in determining the official unemployment rate. We rate that statement pants on fire. So Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez does have some good ideas, but some flawed ones too. Democrats are divided on whether her message is one that will be able to take them to victory in the midterm elections, with the centrists saying that she is just too extreme to represent the Democratic Party. But for many people, disillusioned with the tedium of the American political establishment and horrified and embarrassed by the Trump presidency, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez represents the left-wing anti-establishment message that should expedite some big left-wing victories in the future. You've been listening to Truth Media. Subscribe for more, and I'll be back here soon.